You make Joel feel like he owes you for everything. That's manipulative. And honestly, everyone at this table has noticed. That was my daughter-in-law, Christmas Eve, in front of 11 people, in a house with my name on the title. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't walk out. I picked up my glass, set it down on the end table beside the couch, and stood up slowly. Then I asked her one question. Just one. The kind of question that doesn't need to be loud to land the way it needs to. But before I get to that, I need you to understand something. There was a fact I had been carrying for 2.5 years. I hadn't shared it with my brother Rex. Hadn't mentioned it to my attorney. Hadn't said a word to my son Joel. A piece of information I kept folded in my chest like a receipt you hope you never have to use, but can't bring yourself to throw away. Before we get into any of it, if this kind of story lands with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. I always like knowing who's out there listening. Now let me take you back. Joel called me on a Wednesday afternoon in March, 2 years after my wife passed. I was in the garage, sorting through tools I hadn't touched since the previous fall. His voice had that particular energy it gets when he's excited about something, and trying not to show it, like a kid who's already bought the present and can't wait for you to open it. Dad, I want you to meet someone. We've been seeing each other about 5 months, and I think this is it. I told him to bring her to dinner that weekend. She came on a Saturday. Priscilla was well-dressed, articulate, and had the handshake of someone who'd practiced first impressions until they were flawless. She answered every question I asked with the right amount of confidence and the right amount of modesty, and I spent most of the dinner telling myself I was being unfair. Every father thinks no one is quite good enough for his kid. That's not wisdom. It's just a reflex. What I noticed, though, and what I couldn't quite let go of, was the way she looked at the house when she first walked in. Not at the rooms, at the square footage. There's a difference. 14 months after that dinner, they were married. I wasn't asked about the venue or the date. Joel mentioned it 2 weeks before that they'd booked a vineyard 2 hours north, and that Priscilla had handled all the logistics. The wedding was beautiful. Every detail was in its place, every person seated with precision, every plate cleared on schedule. I stood next to Rex at the reception and watched my son dance with his new wife. He looked the way a man looks when something he'd been anxious about for a long time is finally done. Rex leaned toward me and said, "She runs a tight ship." I nodded. Neither of us said anything else. About 3 months after the wedding, I sat Joel down at my kitchen table. The same table where he'd done homework every night from 4th grade through senior year. The same table where my wife and I had told him about her diagnosis. And I made him an offer. I own a piece of property on the western shore of a small lake in western Michigan. My wife and I bought it together 26 years ago, as a weekend place. We spent 3 summers renovating it into something real. I replaced the subfloor myself, hung all the drywall, rebuilt the back deck from scratch. She picked out every tile in the bathroom. By the time we were done, it was a proper house, 3 bedrooms, a screened porch, a dock I'd reconstructed the summer before she got sick. I had paid off the mortgage 8 years earlier. The property at the time was appraised at just over $385,000. I told Joel, "You two are just starting out, live there. No rent for now, get yourselves settled first." His eyes went red at the corners. He tried to say something and had to look away for a second. I called Priscilla the next day to go over some things, where the water shutoff was, which breaker to flip if the kitchen appliances all ran at once. A small quirk with the propane on the back porch grill. "That's very generous of you," she said, smooth as glass. I told her the title was still in my name, just so she knew. I mentioned it the way you'd mention a property tax date. Something practical and unremarkable. "Of course," she said, and moved on. There was no lease, no written agreement, just my word and hers. I understand now that those two things don't carry the same weight. In the filing cabinet in my home office, behind a folder of contractor receipts I should have thrown out years ago, sat a copy of the title, my name on every line, the address out on the lake, paid in full. I didn't think much about it after that, until I needed to. The first year I told myself the small things were nothing. I used to drive out to the lakehouse on Sunday mornings. I'd done that for 20 years. It was the place my wife and I went to decompress at the end of the week. After she died, it hurt to go, but it hurt more not to. I wanted to see the place still lived in. Priscilla was always gracious when I arrived, and always somehow unavailable. Company coming later. Joel's running errands. She'd just put something in the oven. You don't have to call ahead, she said once, though it does help. So I started calling ahead. Then she started letting those calls go to voicemail. Then she stopped calling back until I'd already driven the hour and a half, one way, and turned around. Joel's birthday in June. I was out in the yard when a photo popped up on my phone from his social media. A bonfire at the lakehouse. A dozen people I didn't recognize. Rex and his wife were both there, standing near the fire with drinks in their hands, laughing. Rex had his arm around Joel's shoulder. I looked through the pictures twice. I was looking for some sign that I'd been invited, and simply forgotten to write it down. There wasn't one. Joel texted the next morning. Dad, I'm so sorry. I thought Priscilla already texted you. I typed back, no worries, looks like a great night. I put the phone face down on the workbench and stood there for a while. She never called me Dad. I noticed that around month 5, she'd arranged things so Joel called her mother by her first name, easy, warm like family, but she called me Gerald every single time. The name came out of her mouth like a formality being honored, not a relationship being tended. I told myself she needed more time. Some people take longer to warm up to in-laws. I made myself believe it. Joel texted that evening, it won't happen again, I promise. It happened 4 more times before Christmas. When Priscilla told us she was pregnant, I drove to the lumberyard that weekend and picked out the boards myself. White ash. Good grain. I'd built furniture before. The reading nook in the den was mine. The shelving in Joel's childhood bedroom too. I built a crib. Took me 3 weekends. I sanded it by hand and finished it with the same water-based stain my father had used on the furniture in our house when I was young. I carried it out to the lake house in the bed of my truck and assembled it in the room they'd set aside for the nursery. Priscilla said it was beautiful. Joel ran his palm along the top rail and looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was 9 years old, and I'd fixed something that had seemed completely unfixable. That was the best afternoon I'd had in well over a year. The baby came in late September, a girl. Joel texted me at 10:52 at night. She's here. We'll let you know when you can visit. I read that 3 times. I made myself a cup of decaf I didn't drink, sat in my wife's chair by the front window, and went to bed. I drove to the hospital the next morning, found the floor, found the room. The door was halfway open and I could hear voices inside. Her mother laughing softly, a television on low. I knocked. Her mother was in the chair by the window, holding the baby. She looked up at me with the particular satisfaction of someone who has already secured the best seat in the room and knows it. Priscilla looked up from the bed, tired, genuine underneath that, and underneath something else too. Gerald, we're a little overwhelmed right now. Of course, I said, I won't stay. Joel was standing near the window with that look new fathers get when they haven't slept and have just discovered they don't need to. He handed me the baby without being asked, and I was quietly grateful for that one thing. My granddaughter weighed 7 pounds and some change. She had my wife's coloring, the same light hair, the same narrow nose. She was asleep and completely unbothered by everything happening around her, which struck me as the most sensible attitude available. I held her for 6 minutes. I know because I counted, not out of resentment, because I wanted to remember the exact weight of it, the particular warmth of a new person who doesn't yet know you exist. Then her grandmother stood up from the chair, not urgently, just with the practiced motion of someone reclaiming a position, and I handed the baby back to Joel, said my goodbyes, and told them I'd come again soon. Her mother stayed for 2 weeks. When I called during that time, sometimes Priscilla picked up. Sometimes no one did. That evening I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. The engine ticked. A neighbor's sprinkler kicked on and ran its cycle. I kept thinking about my wife. She would have walked into that room and rearranged it with her presence alone. She would have made her grandmother scoot over, would have made Priscilla feel seen and not surveilled. She had that gift. I never properly learned it. Some people carry a room without effort. I mostly just try not to disturb one. I went inside, didn't call anyone. The rewrite started quietly. That's how it always starts. A woman from our church mentioned it first. We were in the parking lot after the second service in September, and she tilted her head at me with the careful look of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say. Gerald, I heard Priscilla mention you. She seemed concerned. Said things between you two have been complicated. That you can be. She paused. She used the word overbearing. I stood there for a moment. Did she? She seemed genuinely worried about you. I thanked her and drove home. I sat in my driveway and turned the word over. Overbearing. I'm a retired general contractor. I go to bed before 10. I've driven 90 minutes to visit my son and been turned around at the door. Whatever overbearing meant in Priscilla's version of me, it wasn't the man who had been quietly swallowing every small humiliation for 2 years without saying a word, because he didn't want to put his son in the middle of something. I gave it 3 days before I brought it up with Joel, not in anger. The way I'd approach a problem on a job site: find the issue, name it clearly, work toward a fix. We sat on my back porch. I asked him plainly if he'd heard Priscilla describe me that way to people. He looked at his hands. She doesn't mean it as a criticism, Dad. You can just be a lot sometimes. When? I asked. Give me one specific example. He couldn't. We both sat with that silence, which was its own kind of answer. That night, after he left, I went to the filing cabinet. Not because I planned to. My hand just went there on the way to the kitchen. I took out the copy of the title, set it flat on my desk under the lamp, read my name on every line, the address out on the lake, the date I'd paid it off. I sat with that paper for a long time. Then I folded it once and put it back in the drawer. I didn't think of it as a weapon. I want to be clear about that. I thought of it the way you think of a fact you hope you never have to use. The kind that only becomes necessary when someone decides the truth is no longer worth honoring. I put the paper away, but I didn't forget it was there. 6 months before Christmas, Joel called on a Saturday morning while I was having coffee on the back porch. He spent a few minutes on small talk. Then he shifted gears the way he used to when he was 16 and needed something he didn't know how to ask for directly. Dad, Priscilla and I have been talking. We'd love to start building equity. Is there any chance we could buy the lakehouse from you? Below market, obviously, since it's a family thing. I set my mug on the porch rail. Whose idea was this? A pause too long. We talked about it together, but she brought it up first, yeah. I told him I'd need time to think. He said, of course, no pressure, take all the time I needed. I could hear her in the background when he said it. I couldn't make out what she was saying. 2 days later, I called Peter, my attorney, a man who'd handled my wife's estate and whom I'd known for close to 20 years. I laid everything out. He confirmed what I already knew. No lease, no legal claim, no tenancy rights that a written notice couldn't dissolve. The property was mine as clearly as my own name. I didn't tell Joel about that conversation, but I made a decision. I would not sell, not now. The house would go to Joel clean and free in my will, but Priscilla's name would not appear on any document involving that property while I was alive. It wasn't punitive, it was honest. I knew the difference, even if no one else would. I turned Joel down on a Tuesday evening, kept it brief. It's not the right time for me, son. I hope you can understand that. No elaboration, no apology. The invitations stopped the following week. Not dramatically. Not with any announcement. They just stopped. The Sunday calls from Joel got shorter. For 3 months, I had no reason to drive out to the lake, because there was no one out there who wanted to see me. I noticed my granddaughter's absence more than anything else. She was 9 months old. Every week at that age is a different child. 3 months felt like missing chapters from a book I wasn't sure I'd ever get to finish. Then Joel called me on a Wednesday evening in late August, from his cell phone, not the house, which meant he was somewhere he could talk. We met in the parking lot of a coffee shop near the highway exit I used to take out to the lake. His car, engine off. He looked like a man who'd been running the same argument through his head for weeks without resolution. She's not happy about the house, he said. I was wondering if maybe you could talk to her. The 3 of us together. Explain your reasoning. I looked at my son. He had his mother's jawline and her habit of looking just to the left of your face when he was saying something that was costing him something. Explain what exactly? I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it again. There was no good answer to that question, and he knew it. I got out of the car, told him I loved him, said we'd talk more soon. That was the last time I saw him before Christmas Eve. 3 weeks later, a text from Priscilla arrived, no greeting, just, "You're welcome to join us for Christmas Eve. Dinner at 5. Bring something if you'd like." I read it twice, then I replied, "I'll be there." I meant it, probably not in the way she expected. Rex called me the week before Christmas and told me what he'd done. He'd called Priscilla directly. He didn't ask my permission because he knew I'd have told him not to. He kept his voice even, he said. He told her he'd watched me give them everything and never ask for anything in return, and that I didn't deserve to be treated like a stranger to my own granddaughter. What did she say? I asked. She said, Rex, Gerald and I have a complicated relationship. I'd appreciate it if you stayed out of family matters. I repeated the phrase slowly, a complicated relationship. Rex let me sit with that for a moment. Then he asked what I was going to do. I'm going to Christmas dinner, I said. He didn't like that answer, but he knows me well enough not to push. What I didn't tell Rex, what I hadn't told anyone, was that my old friend Abe would also be at that table. Abe and I had known each other since our mid-20s, when we'd worked the same framing crew in Kalamazoo. He'd become a deacon at his church over the years, and he knew things about me that even Rex didn't. He was going to be sitting in that living room because Priscilla had invited him herself. She'd mentioned it to Joel, who mentioned it to me, saying she thought it would bring warmth and community to the evening. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Abe had been to my kitchen table 3 times in the past year. He'd heard every chapter of this story from start to finish, in his own words and mine. She had arranged her own witness without realizing what she was doing. The morning of Christmas Eve, I laid my clothes out on the bed, a navy sport coat I'd bought for a retirement dinner 8 years back and worn maybe a dozen times since. My wife had buttoned the top button herself the first time I put it on and said, "You look like a man people trust." I hadn't worn it since her funeral. I put it on anyway. I drove out to the lake. The trees along the road had long since dropped their leaves, and the bare branches caught the pale December light in a way that looked almost drawn. I parked on the gravel drive and sat a moment before getting out. I'd bought this land with my wife before Joel was born. Replaced the roof myself the summer Joel turned 6. Rebuilt the dock twice. Scattered my wife's ashes off that dock 18 months ago, on a morning when the lake was completely still, and the only sound was the water moving against the pilings. 11 people would be inside that evening. Rex and his wife, Priscilla's mother, 2 couples from her office whose faces I'd heard described but never seen, my granddaughter in her portable crib, Joel, Priscilla, and me. The man whose name was on the title, invited by text to celebrate Christmas, in a house she'd apparently already decided was hers. I got out of the car, straightened the jacket. I built this house into what it is. I just never imagined I'd have to decide whether to take it back. If you've ever walked up a front path to a place that used to feel like yours and felt the particular weight of staying quiet because you love someone too much to blow everything apart, you already know what I felt on that front path. That kind of quiet has a cost. You pay it every time you keep it. If this is landing close to home for you, hit the like button right now and tell me in the comments, have you ever stayed quiet too long because you were afraid of what the truth would cost? I read every one of them. Now let me take you inside. She opened the door before I could knock. Gerald, glad you made it. The way she said it, pleasant with a slight tilt of the head, the way you greet someone you've invited out of obligation and don't particularly expect to enjoy, landed exactly the way she intended. I handed her the bottle of wine I'd brought. She glanced at the label and set it on the entryway table. Thank you for having me, I said. She was already walking. The house smelled like roasting garlic and something with cinnamon and brown sugar. 11 people in a space built for 6 made it warm in the way that starts to feel close after the first hour. I found Rex and his wife near the fireplace. Rex put a hand on my shoulder without saying a word. His wife handed me a sparkling water and gave me the look she'd been giving me for 30 years, when she wanted me to know she was paying close attention. My seat was at the far end of the table, near the corner where they'd set up the portable crib. That was fine with me. My granddaughter was asleep on her back, one arm flung out to the side the way she'd slept since she was 3 weeks old. I watched her breathe for a while. That was the best part of the whole evening. Priscilla ran the dinner the way she ran everything, efficiently, precisely, with the practiced ease that makes everyone around her feel slightly behind. Her friends from work laughed on cue and offered the right compliments. Her mother sat to Priscilla's right and passed dishes with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who knows she's in the inner circle and wants everyone to know she knows it. Abe found me after the main course. We talked in the corner near the hallway about a trail we'd both been meaning to walk before the real cold set in. Easy company. Abe was the kind of man who made you feel like there was more time than there actually was. I noticed Priscilla register our conversation from across the room. Just a flicker. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A small calculation being run and stored. She hadn't known Abe and I were close. I could see the exact moment she filed that away. Joel sat across from me at the far end of the table. He cut his food into careful pieces. He didn't meet my eyes once during the entire meal. The dishes were cleared by 8. Coats came off chairs. Everyone settled into the living room with their drinks. The afternoon had gone uneventfully, which in that family was the same as well. I was talking with Rex near the bookshelf when I heard it. That particular shift in Priscilla's voice that told me we were finished with pleasantries. "It must be nice," she said loud enough to carry, "to just show up and not have to deal with any of the actual work." She was facing her friends, but the angle was deliberate. Her mother smiled beside her. I kept talking to Rex. "Joel carries everything around here. I just wish we had a little more support from the family side." She said family the way people say it when they mean the opposite. One of her friends nodded with practiced sympathy. Rex's jaw went tight. He looked at me. I put my hand flat on the shelf beside me and kept it there. Priscilla refilled her wine. Her voice was bright now, almost festive. She'd been doing this long enough to know that my silence was permission in her model of the world. Every time I went quiet over the past 2.5 years, she had moved one step further. I'd been teaching her without meaning to. She walked to the center of the room. Abe was in the armchair to my left. He set his coffee mug on the side table with deliberate care. I didn't look at him. I looked at her. She looked at me, and she said it. "You know what, Gerald? You make Joel feel like he owes you for everything. That's manipulative. And honestly, everyone at this table has noticed." The room went completely still. The kind of silence that follows a sound everyone heard and no one is sure was real. One of her friends had been mid-sentence about something. She stopped and didn't start again. I watched 3 things happen at once. Her mother's eyes dropped to her wine glass. Joel's face went the color of chalk. Abe placed his hand flat on his knee. Priscilla stood in the middle of the room with her wine glass and 2.5 years of practiced certainty. And she looked at me with the specific satisfaction of someone who has been waiting a very long time to say a thing out loud, and has finally said it. She was waiting for me to either collapse or explode. Either way, in her model of the world, she won. I set my glass on the end table. The small, clean sound of glass on wood was the only sound in the room. I stood up, not fast, not with any theater, the way a man stands when he has something to say and has decided the time has come. I straightened my jacket. "Priscilla, let me ask you something." She lifted her chin. Her eyes were bright with certainty. "How long have you been paying property taxes on this house?" The brightness behind her eyes shifted. "What is that supposed to mean?" "This house," I said, "the one you're standing in right now, it is not Joel's house. It is not your house. It has never been your house. My name is on the title. I paid it off 11 years ago. I have been paying the property taxes every single year you've lived here, and the homeowner's insurance and every maintenance cost, because none of that is your responsibility in a house that is not yours. There is no lease. There is no agreement. There is only my generosity, which you just finished testing." The room did not move. A child ran across the floor upstairs, one of the kids from the other couple, old enough to find their own entertainment. The sound of small feet was the only thing happening anywhere. Priscilla's mouth opened, closed. Abe's head lowered slowly, the way a man nods when something he has long known has finally been said out loud in front of the right people. Rex looked at Priscilla steadily. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He'd been waiting 2.5 years for this room, and he was going to let it do its work. Her mother was looking at her daughter with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Something between alarm and the particular dread of a woman realizing the version of events she'd been given may have been missing several chapters. No one moved toward Priscilla. "I didn't come here to fight," I said, "but I will not stand at my own table and be told I'm manipulative." I let that sit. Then I went to find my jacket. No one moved for a long moment after that. The word title was still in the air. You could feel the room doing the math, running back through 2.5 years of holiday dinners, The casual way Priscilla had talked about painting the nursery, the deck renovation she'd been planning for spring, arriving one by one at the same uncomfortable answer. Then Joel stood up. It was the first time all evening he'd risen without being asked to do something. He stood the way a man stands when he's been underwater and has finally broken the surface. Not surprised exactly. Surfacing. Priscilla. His voice was quiet, very careful. Did you know about the title? She turned toward him. The confidence she'd carried into the center of the room had started reorganizing itself into something defensive. Of course I knew it was his house. That doesn't. Did you know we had no legal claim to it? That if he wanted us out, we'd have had to leave? That's not the point. Then what is? Priscilla looked around the room. One of her friends had set her wineglass on the mantel and crossed her arms, the posture of someone deciding she'd rather be uninvolved. The other couple had gone very still. Her mother's expression had curdled into the particular resentment of a woman who realizes the story her daughter told her was missing several important chapters. Nobody moved toward Priscilla. I picked up my jacket from the chair where I'd left it 3 hours before. That navy sport coat, my wife's jacket. I put it on button by button in the quiet. No one spoke while I did this. There is something about watching a man button a jacket slowly, in a room that has gone completely still, that carries more weight than anything you could say out loud. At the door, I stopped. Joel was still standing in the middle of the room. He had his mother's jawline, and a look on his face I hadn't seen in 2.5 years. Not anger. Not embarrassment, recognition. The specific expression of a person who has just understood something they should have understood much earlier. Call me when you're ready, son. I opened the front door. The December air came in cold and direct. I stepped out and pulled the door closed behind me, softly. The way you close a door when you want someone to hear that there's no anger left in it. Just something finished. From inside, a moment later, I heard my granddaughter begin to cry. The clear, uncomplicated cry of a baby waking up with no agenda, just announcing that she was there. I walked to my car. No one came out after me. I sat behind the wheel before starting the engine. The house behind me glowed with every window lit. Inside, something was either ending or changing shape into whatever it would eventually have to become. I drove home. I want to step outside the story for just a moment. I drove home that night not knowing what happened next. Part of me had braced for the worst, for Joel to choose silence again, for everything to harden into something permanent and cold. But there is something that happens when you say a true thing in a room full of people. It doesn't disappear. It just sits there, and everyone has to decide what to do with it. If you've ever had a moment like that, where you finally said the thing you'd been holding for years, tell me about it in the comments. I read everyone. Now let me tell you what happened after I drove home. 4 days went by, no call from Joel. I didn't reach out. I'd said what I needed to say. The next move wasn't mine. I went about my week, changed the oil in the truck, made a pot of chili on Tuesday with the recipe my wife had written on an index card so soft and stained from years of use that I'd had to tape the corners. I got the card out and set it on the counter while I cooked, the way I always had, even though I didn't need to look at it anymore. Rex called on the second day. Her mother had been busy, calls to extended family on both sides, a version of Christmas Eve that positioned the whole evening as Gerald's unprovoked attack on a daughter-in-law who had done nothing but work herself to exhaustion hosting a holiday for 11 people. What did you tell people? I asked. That I was there, Rex said, and that I have working eyes. That was Rex. He'd never once in his life complicated the truth by adding to it. On the third day, a message arrived through a social media platform I barely use, from a woman I didn't recognize, one of Priscilla's friends from the dinner. I read the first 2 sentences. That was enough. I blocked the account and went back to the chili. I won't say it didn't affect me. It did a little. Not because of what she said. She hadn't been there for any of it. Hadn't seen the bonfire photos I found on my phone. Hadn't been in that hospital room. Had no idea what the past 2.5 years had actually looked like. But because it meant Priscilla had been on the phone inside of 72 hours, building her case with whoever would listen. I found it briefly exhausting to think about. That night I didn't sleep well, not from regret, not from anger, from something quieter and harder to name, the particular worry of a man who has done the necessary thing and doesn't yet know what it cost him. On the fifth day, there was a knock at my front door. Joel. He looked like a man who hadn't slept right in 4 nights. He came in without a word, the way he used to come home from school on the hard days, when something had gone wrong and he didn't yet have words for it. When he was 11 and a friend said something cruel at recess. When he was 16 and the girl he'd liked chose someone else, he'd always come to this kitchen the same way. Quietly, coat still on, needing a moment before he could speak. He sat at the kitchen table. There's a chip in the corner, near the right edge from the summer. He turned 7 and decided to test what happened if he hit it with the back of a toy truck. We'd never fixed it. It was just part of the table now. I didn't ask him to explain. I plugged in the kettle and got out 2 mugs. The same pair my wife had found at a craft fair in Traverse City about 15 years back. Heavy ceramic, dark blue glaze. I'd replaced almost everything else in the kitchen after she died. Never replaced the mugs. He spoke first. Dad, I don't know how I let it get this far. I put the mugs down and sat across from him, and for the first time in 2.5 years, I didn't choose the version of the truth that would protect him most. I told him what the past 2.5 years had looked like from where I was standing. The bonfire photos I'd found while sitting in my yard. 6 minutes holding my granddaughter in that hospital room, while her grandmother sat in the good chair. The woman from church who'd said the word overbearing with careful, rehearsed pity. The Sunday visits that had gotten shorter and shorter until they were mostly me, saying everything's fine and meaning it less each time. I wasn't angry when I said these things. I was just accurate. There's a difference. I think he could hear it. Joel listened without interrupting. He watched me the way he used to watch me when he was working through something difficult. Not defensive, just concentrating. When I finished, he sat with it for a moment. Why didn't you say something sooner, Dad? Because I kept thinking you'd find your way back on your own. He nodded slowly, and if I hadn't, I thought about that honestly before I answered. I'd have been lonelier than I care to admit, and I'd have kept the house. He almost smiled. Then it faded. He looked at the chip in the corner of the table. Dad, I'm sorry. I know, son. We sat there while the tea cooled between us. We didn't fix everything that morning. There was too much of it. And Joel still had to go home to a conversation I couldn't have for him. But we found the place to start from. That was enough for that morning. It was exactly enough. The following week, I called Peter again. We talked through the options, no anger in it. Just a practical matter of what a fair arrangement looked like now that everything was on the table. I sent a formal letter to Joel and Priscilla the following Friday, written plainly. They had 60 days to either sign a lease at current market rate, appraised at $1,750 per month, or make arrangements for alternate housing. I included Peter's contact information for questions. The letter was not a punishment. It was a description of reality. We had been operating in a fiction for 2.5 years, and I was done pretending that fiction was fine. Priscilla's response came by text 2 days later. The language was scorched, accusations of retaliation, of cruelty, of a father who had never truly accepted her. I read it once, put the phone face down on my desk, did not reply. Joel called me 10 days after that. His voice was tired in a way I recognized. The exhaustion of a man who has been arguing with himself more than with anyone else. We'll sign the lease, Dad. Okay. I want you to know this isn't how I wanted things to go. I know that, son. The lease was signed in late January. I took the monthly payments and put them directly into a $529 college savings account, my granddaughter's. I set it up in her name with a tribute note to her grandmother, the way you'd name a scholarship after someone. When I eventually told Joel where the money was going, he went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She would have wanted that." Yeah, I said, she would have. 3 weeks into February, Joel called on a Sunday morning to tell me what Priscilla had said. She'd drawn the line clearly. Him or me, his wife or his father. She framed it as a reasonable request from a woman who had been humiliated in her own home. Except it wasn't her home. And what had happened at Christmas dinner hadn't been humiliation so much as consequence. I kept that thought to myself. Joel hadn't called me for my analysis. He'd called to tell me his answer. I said no, Joel told me. I told her he's my father. I'm not cutting him out. I sat down at the kitchen table. I hadn't let myself expect that, or maybe I'd hoped for it so long that I'd stopped letting myself expect it. How did she take it? I asked. Not well. We're seeing a counselor. I don't know how it goes. That was honest. More honest than he'd been with me in years. I told him so. I didn't raise my son to choose me. I raised him, the way my wife and I both tried to know the difference between love and control. For 2.5 years, I'd watched that line get blurred until I wasn't sure he could see it anymore. He could see it now. What happened between Joel and Priscilla after that wasn't mine to manage or predict. Some things mend. Some things reach a workable arrangement both people can live inside. Some things end quietly. That was their story, and they were the only ones who could write it. I hoped enough light had come in to make a difference. By March, Joel was bringing my granddaughter over on Saturday afternoons. Just the two of them most weeks. She was almost a year old by then and had recently discovered that walking toward things was considerably more interesting than being carried. She moved through my kitchen like a small, extremely determined explorer, cataloging every low cabinet door and chair leg as items of significant scientific interest. I put my wife's photograph back on the kitchen windowsill. I'd taken it down about a year into Joel's marriage. Priscilla had looked at it once with a kind of appraising silence I hadn't liked, and I'd made the small accommodation without admitting to myself what I was doing. Told myself I was being considerate. That wasn't quite the full truth of it. I put it back on a Saturday morning in February. My wife in her garden, summer light, squinting slightly into the sun. She was 41 in that photo. She had no idea what was coming, and she looked completely at peace, which is exactly how she moved through her whole life, and exactly how she left it. I don't know what happens between Joel and Priscilla in the long run. I genuinely don't. Some things mend. Some things reach a functional arrangement both people can live inside. Some things end quietly. That's their story, and they're the only ones who can write it. What I do know is this. On Saturday afternoons, my granddaughter points at the birds outside my kitchen window, like they are the most extraordinary things she has ever encountered in her short year on Earth. I sit down on the floor beside her and agree with her completely. People ask me whether I regret waiting as long as I did. I'm honestly not sure. Part of me thinks that if I'd said something 18 months earlier, Joel would have defended her, and the whole thing would have calcified faster into something irrecoverable. Part of me thinks 2.5 years of silence was a form of enabling. I'd convinced myself was patience. I still don't have a clean answer on that one. What I do know is this. Staying quiet is not the same as being weak. There are real reasons a person stays silent. Love, hope, the specific fear of damaging something you can't repair. I stayed quiet because I loved my son. That was true and it was mine, and I don't apologize for it. But there comes a point where your silence stops protecting the people you love and starts protecting the people who are hurting them. That point for me was Christmas Eve. I didn't plan what I said. I didn't rehearse it. I didn't walk into that house with a strategy. I walked in with one fact I had never used, and I used it only because someone decided, in front of 11 people, in a house with my name on the title, to tell me I was manipulative. I set my glass down. I stood up. I asked one question. The rest, the lease, the boundaries, the long Sunday phone calls with Joel that have since become a habit again, all of that came after. Not because I planned any of it, because once the truth is in the room, everything else has to arrange itself around it. That's what I keep coming back to. The truth was always there. It just took her saying that one thing for me to finally let it be known. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think I was right to wait as long as I did? Or should I have spoken up sooner? Leave your answer in the comments. There's no wrong answer, and I read every single one. If this story stayed with you, there's another one in the description below I think you'll want to hear next. Same kind of stakes, same kind of quiet that finally runs out. Thank you for being here with me.